Hi, I'm Mitch, and welcome to the Restoration Road, where today's guest is CEO of Vera Bradley, Rob Wallstrom. Rob has become a good friend of mine through our efforts in the Global Leadership Summit. Fort Wayne is the largest satellite site in the world for this activity that communicates through about 16 speakers each year of faith-based leadership, and we're seeing it transform Fort Wayne through the power of the Holy Spirit. You're going to love hearing Rob's story and his insights as a tremendous and gifted leader. Rob, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
I've been looking so forward to this. I cherish our friendship, and your story is really impactful to me. And then I want to get your insights on leadership too while I have you here. You grew up in a Christian home in Los Angeles. Can you describe what home was like?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually really lucky. Had two great parents, great brother, and it was, really a great childhood. But it was interesting growing up in a Christian home, but at the same time, I wouldn't say my early life was necessarily filled with that in our house. I mean, both my parents were Christian, but not necessarily super involved day to day in a way that I understood it as a child. So,
Your dad's side was German?
correct. Yeah, German and Swedish. So,
And your mom's side was Scottish and Welsh?
yeah, basically, she doesn't actually know, but in that general vicinity.
Well, talk about, was it your mom's dad was an alcoholic card player who had become a Christian?
Yes.
Did you know him or just know about him?
No, I knew him. He was an amazing man. I would tell, growing up, definitely my favorite grandparent. Amazing grandfather.
So he had a huge impact on you.
Yes.
Did that lead to you at age 13 surrendering your life to Christ?
I think what really led to that was just what I was going through personally. I think as I was growing up, struggling with anger, and I would say just kind of a self-centeredness, and I was not the person I wanted to be. And I really never forget, I walked into our kitchen where my mom was and said, "Mom, I don't understand why you always seem to have this joy and peace and you can handle everything. What is it?" And she just told me it was all about having Christ in her life and what he had done in her life. And I'm like, I want that. So
Wow.
right then, there, gave my life to Christ and never looked back.
That is awesome. Did you get engaged in a local church or a youth group?
Yeah, I did. It was interesting because at the time, family wasn't really going to church, but my mom said you should get plugged in. So I started going to a junior high youth group and started getting involved and got involved in leadership, and just one thing led to the other, and God just really kind of started opening doors and putting burdens on my heart. So.
And when you got in high school, you started to lead a Bible study. Was it at high school?
It was at the high school campus, and I'll never forget because I was an incredibly shy kid, incredibly shy. And I remember God putting this thing on my heart saying, "I want you to start this Bible study on campus." And I remember just like shaking and getting nauseous. Just the whole idea of it scared me, but just really wanted to serve God. So I said, "That's what you're leading me to. That's what we'll do." And so I got a couple friends together from church and we started it. I remember the best day was we put handouts in everybody's lockers one morning. You can imagine what happened at 8 o'clock in the morning. The whole school was full of these things. So got a little bit of trouble for that, but it was an amazing experience.
What was the study? Did you start in a particular book in the Bible? Did you have a book that you went through?
We generally were just going through different books in the Bible. So definitely grew up in the church that was very much about just walking through verse by verse, chapter by chapter. I don't remember, it's probably Philippians, Galatians, that type of area. So.
That's awesome.
And it seems like always in my life, it's like when he asks me to do something, it usually is not, it's not the thing I wanted to do. It's the very thing I never wanted to do. So I can go through stories after stories where he's put me in situations where I said I would never do that. So I'm very careful about saying I would never do that anymore.
So you had grown up in California, and you're going to follow a girlfriend to Albuquerque?
Yep, a high school girlfriend. Followed her to school, which was a funny thing to do and not one that I would recommend, but yes, I did do that.
And the relationship ended quickly?
It ended before I got there. So I was in the middle of the desert, and but it was funny because it ended up being a desert experience for me, even in my Christian walk. God just really used that time, and never would have known. That's why I think I was there. Right? I thought it was to follow somebody, but I think it was God was putting me there because he kind of stripped all of my other commitments and engagements out and really had me focus on him. And it was a great great time in my spiritual walk.
And that was a few months that you
Yeah,
were there?
I was there only for one semester. I got out quickly, but I was there for a semester.
So you returned to San Diego, and what happens next for you?
Yeah, I mean, one, just going to school there, got involved in a lot of different things, finished up school, got in retail, and I remember, always going to school. I was like, I felt God calling me into the ministry, and when I was going to school, I really thought that's what was going to happen. So I was getting an accounting degree, thought I would never use it, and it was just interesting how God used that stage of my life. And I got to the end and didn't feel as called at that time to do it, and got caught up in retail and
The rest
been
is
involved
history.
in retail for a couple of years. So
We're going to unpack that. How did you actually come to the conclusion with clarity that you were not going to do seminary?
That's an interesting story, right? And I think what's interesting is you look back in the Bible and how God uses circumstances sometimes to put people in situations. And those circumstances are not always the best, right? It's not always that you're following God and therefore you're in this situation. Sometimes you're actually rebelling from God. And so I think part of that was I was not comfortable that my life was in a stage where I could go into seminary and stand up, right? So, but I just kept praying about it. And what are you trying to do, God? And for whatever reason, God used that season. And I look back on it and I realized that if I had gone into seminary right then, I think it would have been the wrong thing. I think I was a very different person in that stage of my life, and I don't think God would have used me in the same way. So.
That's insightful. You grew up working as you were going to school, and even as a little kid. Can you talk about what you did and how that led to a retail career?
Day one, first thing I did was order the seeds you could do at that time from Boy Scouts, where you could order seeds and go door to door and try to resell them. So it started early, and then did the paper route, and they did 2 paper routes, and then went from the bicycle to the motorcycle to the car to retail. I always felt this, drive to go out and accomplish things. And I think my dad was always a factor in that good German heritage, right, so.
What age were you when you worked in a restaurant cleaning and you restored equipment too?
Yeah, it wasn't a restaurant, but it was in a restaurant equipment business, right? So what we would do is we would go in and we would take the equipment out, refurbish it, resell it. And so, I was 16 to 18 when I was doing that.
So you're always pretty entrepreneurial.
Always out doing something, so.
And did you start selling in retail on the floor?
I did. I was a part-time salesperson, senior in high school after the restaurant equipment experience, which was very dirty, between you don't want to see what ovens and stoves look like, or cleaning toilets, or doing any of those kind of things. But
I've done that.
So I said, I want a clean job. And so I got into retail my last semester and was selling part-time sales associate on the floor. And then I went to college and I had to pay the bills. So I put myself through, had to do something. So I stayed in retail through college.
So when is your first department manager role?
I think that was probably when I was about 20, probably a junior in college or a sophomore in college, something like that.
And what kind of store?
It was a store called Robinson's Department Store in Southern California, so most people would think of Macy's.
And were you managing people? Did you have to determine inventory, what would sell, what would not? Were you kind of doing everything, like the money marketing and management of it?
Well, really, when you manage the department, it really, more than anything, you're just focused on driving sales, right? So however you can do that, whether it's through presentation or through people, but I would tell you the people experience that first time was incredibly interesting. And I think it's a great example of why I didn't belong in seminary to start with. Because I was a very A type of personality. If it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do. Why doesn't everybody else understand that? And I learned very quickly to listen better, give less direction, listen a lot more. And that was, I think, transformational to me as a person.
How do you end up with Saks in Beverly Hills?
Yeah, that was interesting because number one, it was the department store was becoming so focused on off price, and it was just not what I wanted to do. So I really wanted to get back in an environment that was about quality product, treating people well, creating a great experience. So I went from Macy's, I went to Saks in Beverly Hills and spent 18 years at Saks.
18 years with Saks, and where did you travel to?
I started in Beverly Hills. I was in San Antonio for over 3 years, Houston for a year, and then New York, both running the Saks store on Fifth Avenue and then running our outlet business, off-price business for the last 5-6 years.
You managed the flagship store on Fifth Avenue. How long were you in that role?
About 6 years.
And what was that like in Manhattan? And what was Christmas time like? Did you do like 25% of the whole annual volume in December, November, December?
December's huge. That store is amazing. I mean, I've had the privilege of being all over the world, seeing department stores all over the world, and that one is the most magical department store in the world. So it was a great experience. I'll never forget, one year we decided we were going to put lights on the outside of the building, and somebody came up with the idea, believe it or not, where they got the Rockettes and they closed down Fifth Avenue for the tree lighting. And you don't close down
No.
streets in New York for anything. So it was definitely a great experience.
Did you, in that experience, have any defining moments that affected your leadership? Did you have a high-level customer that maybe spent thousands and thousands and they get mad? Did you bring in a new product and you thought, wow, that really works? Were any aha moments like that?
One, from the business standpoint, I think the idea of being scrappy and doing interesting things, I'll never forget. You know, we're running a store that's doing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Big store, hugely profitable. But when I walked in there, our budget to do things like refurbish the store was literally zero.
Oh my goodness.
And so we got to the point where we got like $200,000, right? And in size of what that store is nothing. And so normally most things you would do would cost a ton of money, but we said, okay, we got to prove that spending money works. So we would take $50,000 and redo departments and have huge increases. And so that zero budget turned to $250, that turned into about $10 million a year by the time I left.
That is cool.
But just that idea of being persistent and driving and working with people, it's amazing what people can do together.
Yeah.
If you give them a goal. You know, I
Yeah.
think sometimes having a lot of resources actually makes you produce less effectively, right? Having less resources really brings out the creativity.
Yeah. I love how it sounds to me a little bit like a reallocation of resources, and you start putting a little bit here and then you see things explode. And I know in my business, when I reallocated resources, I was thinking, you know, yeah, we're in an economic downturn, but God still provided a nice chunk here. Why can't I make it work?
Yeah.
And so I started reallocating resources, similar to what you said, and then I would find, wow, when I allocate them here, that increases revenue. And it all really comes back, don't you think, to the customer's experience with you?
Oh, absolutely.
Why do you think we're struggling so much with customer service in our culture? What do you think the problems with that?
You know what I think? Number one, I think that we just have a tendency, we become selfish. By nature, selfish people, selfish companies are not going to provide good customer service, right? It has to be other focused. And I think that's an area where we're not as strong in. And I think probably too, I think even as a country, as our faith and our morality has changed over time, I think it's just focused to be more self-centered.
When you were in New York, did you live downtown or did you live outside?
No, lived out in Connecticut, which was beautiful. I remember people used to always ask me, do you like living there? I said, my wife does. So my commute was 2 hours in and 2 hours out. So I slept there, but I didn't get a chance to see it too often. So that was not a pleasant experience, and not one that I would recommend.
Yeah, 4 hours a day commuting. Did you do it really early to beat the traffic and then late?
Yep, get on the 5:30 train and hopefully you show up at home before 8 o'clock at night. So.
Oh my goodness. When did you get married?
I got married in '93.
And what city were you in?
Well, at that time we were living in LA.
So she was okay with all this moving that you were doing?
She was okay, yeah. She was originally from Chicago.
Okay.
And so one of the ironies of our marriage, I remember when we got married, I was like, I never want to live in the Midwest, and here I am in Fort Wayne and loving it. So.
That's awesome. Well, you end up being invited by the CEO and chairman to lead Saks Fifth Avenue off Fifth, and you did miraculous change there, big transformation. Can you talk about what you did to radically improve the volume that was done there?
You know, I think it was a great experience, and I think two things were really critical. I think one, just creating a vision that's differentiated and special. I think every business really has to find a way to stand out from the crowd, and we were able to really do that. And we created what we called a luxury in a loft environment, which was different than anything else in the market, and it really worked. But I think one of the most fun things about that role for me was, one, creating that vision, but two, was the ability as the president of this business to really begin to work in setting the culture and really beginning to have that time to really work on teams, setting culture. It's kind of your world. You can try to put your imprint on it, and that was an incredible experience that I really enjoyed.
I see you as a cultural architect, but you originally didn't think you were going to take that position. Can you talk about what your initial thought was and the process that led to you
I think a
saying
lot
yes?
of people don't even know this story, but I'll never forget that our chairman came to me and said, "Hey, I would love for you to do this." And what was going through my mind at the time was never. Never going to do this, no interest. And remember, my career was running away from off-price.
Yeah.
And so when he said, "I want you to go run an off-price business," my mind was saying, this isn't even a consideration.
Now, do the items have flaws in them, or
Nope.
they're just the excess inventory
It
that
can
you
be
move?
excess, stuff you make for it. I mean, the whole
Oh.
off-price industry is very interesting because most people think it's all excess. Very little of it is excess, but
Oh.
most of it is just created for it. It's just a different,
Okay.
economic model.
Got it.
But anyways, when he said, "You want to do this?" it was no. And I learned through the years, I'm not quick to speak my mind. I have a tendency to think about what I want to say. So I said, "Can I talk to you about it on Monday?" And he said, "Sure." So I walked out, called a bunch of people that I knew and mentors and everything. And they were like, "No, you absolutely need to do this. This is the best thing for you." And so I listened and I took it, and they were right. My first reaction was absolutely wrong. Their advice was right.
You doubled the size of the business in
About 5 years. Yeah.
And then you developed the online aspect
we
of
launched
it as
the
well.
online. Yep.
And then you end up selling the company.
Yeah, it was part of Saks Fifth Avenue, which got sold to Hudson Bay Company. So yes, it was sold as part of that transaction.
So how do you end up in Fort Wayne, Indiana with Vera Bradley?
Yeah, it was interesting because at the time the transaction was going through, I got this call and heard about this little company in Fort Wayne, Indiana that literally I had never heard of. Didn't know anything about it, and it was a great journey because I got to meet the founders and I got to meet the company, what the company stood for, the culture in the company. This idea that a good company could succeed was something that was really exciting, because the fashion industry is not really just, its foundation is not good. It's usually based upon trying to tell you there's something wrong with you and we'll fix it, right? If you buy our shoes, you'll feel better. If you buy our suit, you'll look more powerful. If you buy our suit, you'll feel more confident. And to have this company in Vera Bradley that was just about letting people enjoy, celebrate life, watching the customers come together, how they support each other. I said, what if we could take a company like this and begin to transform retail and say good sells?
Wow.
And if good sells, then there'd be more good. And how does that become this virtuous cycle?
That's incredible. How long have you been with Vera Bradley?
About 5 years.
And what are some of the most significant changes or advancements that you've made as the cultural architect?
I think one, the cultural foundation was so strong there in terms of both of our founders really built a great culture. So it was really a lucky environment for me to be able to come in. But I think, as with every fashion brands go through different life cycles. And so as we were going through a life cycle that was not as favorable, helping lead the team through that and all that transformation that we had to go through, and are still going through, it's been a great experience. And I think I've been so impressed by the ability of the organization to not only get through it, but thrive through it, which is not easy. A lot of times when you have to go in and reorganize a business, sometimes the culture gets hurt. And I think, if anything, our culture has continued to get stronger over time.
You have some strong leadership thoughts and principles as you reflect at this point in your life. What are some of those that you would share on building teams, hiring people, the vision, mission, objective, goals, strategies, values? What are some of your thoughts on those things?
Yeah, I think two things. I think one, with anything you're going to build, you better start with a really clear vision. because everything starts to fall off that vision. So you need to start there. And then really getting a team together of talented people. But I think as you build that team as a leader, it's how do you spend the majority of your time listening? You know, I do think that you have transformational CEOs who can come in and turn around situations and be the crazy general and get it done. That's for a very short period of time. That doesn't interest me. What interests me is building an organization that will thrive for years and decades ahead. And I believe leaders who do that build into their teams, and their teams and their organization become sustainable. And the only way you can do that is by letting everybody else be the front. You're there to support the team. The team's not there to support you. And I think that fundamentally is what will make great, sustainable organizations.
You're, in essence, the prime minister, the number one servant. You're serving everybody else to accomplish what they're doing. You're a man of faith. How do you apply your faith in the marketplace? What's your style on doing that and still having people being open and accepting?
Yeah. So it's a great question, and not only being involved in the business world, but being involved in public companies. And as we know, it's always tricky, right? Because at the end of the day, you're working for shareholders that might or might not share your value system.
Right.
And so you always have a responsibility, I believe. You have a responsibility to who you're working for. So it is a tricky balance. But I think, to me, you start by what is God doing in your own life. You know, I'm a big believer. I love the verse in Matthew, right, where in talking about the Beatitudes and looking out over the crowds with the disciples and talking about look what's going on, right? There's this hope for everybody out there, right? Blessed are those who are hungry, for they will be filled. And then you get further in, and it says, let your light shine. You're the light, right? That all of this hope that I'm bringing into the world, that Christ is bringing into the world, very quickly he turns to the disciples and says, guess what? You're the light. And so how do you let God transform you, and how do you reach out and touch people? And to me, that's the best way of living out your faith in a public environment. And, you know, then God opens doors and creates opportunities. But I think it all starts inside and just trying to be a light, right? Trying to bring hope to people.
As you bring that light, and foster that hope, you help provide an environment where you can have open conversations with people on whatever's going on in their lives.
Yep.
Not everyone gets to choose their children, but you did. Can you tell those stories?
Yeah. Incredible blessing. And again, it's funny, I never thought of this till right now, but it's another one of those areas where God is closing the door, but by closing the door, he's opening the door. So my wife and I, for years, had tried to have children. For years, we had looked at adoption. And I'll never forget one time when we were in Texas, we went to an adoption agency and we walked out and we just felt, the word we used was dirty. It just didn't feel right, which is not what you would expect when you're thinking about adopting a kid. And so we kind of like, God was slamming that door. When we got to New York, we said, okay, let's try this again. Went in and found an agency that felt great in. Through a little research, they suggested we look at Russia. And so we went to Russia and adopted both of our kids over a few different years, different places, obviously a big country, but both our daughters, Sophia and Andre, we adopted both of them from Russia. And amazing experience, amazing children, just feel extraordinarily blessed. Just don't even have words to describe it.
That's just absolutely awesome. You would encourage other people to consider adoption?
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing. I'll never forget, too, I was reading a book and they were talking about adoption. It was Compassion International and telling a story about, ironically enough, in a Russian orphanage where about 90+% of the girls who come up through these orphanages end up back on the streets at the end. Just that's kind of how the system works. And this girl said that a missionary from the U.S. came in and gave her a pair of shoes. And that transformed her life. Just that somebody actually said she had enough worth to be given a pair of shoes. She said, I'm worthy, and she did not end up on the streets. And I think that, as Christ said, right, true religion is orphans and widows. Yes. And there are so many kids out there who just need somebody to love them. And It's been amazing is my daughter just did a school project on the foster care system.
Oh.
And I'll never forget one of the things that she said when she was doing the video was just, these kids just need somebody to love them. There's all these kids out there who come from these broken environments that they just need somebody to love them. So I encourage everybody to do it. And what it does for you is unbelievable. With my kids, I always joke, I said, we're the lucky ones.
Yeah, yeah. In a way,
God
you
used you to help us, right?
Yeah,
so
in a way, you were the adopted ones.
Yeah.
In a way, that is really powerful. You're passionate about leadership and you're involved in the Global Leadership Summit. The Fort Wayne location, which you're on the board of Between the Summits, has the largest satellite of the Global Leadership Summit that communicates through about 16 speakers each year, a faith-based leadership model. Can you talk about why you're connected to that and how it's blessed your life?
Yeah. I think really it brings two great passions together for me. One is I believe that Christ transforms lives. Christ transforms communities. I think, God came back in the form of Jesus to say, hey, there is hope, there is transformation, there is freedom. And so I think that's so important. And second, I'm involved in the corporate world. And leadership is so important, and being able to figure out how do you do those things together, because I think the transformation you can bring is huge. I had a friend of mine who runs a charity out of India, and he was talking about it feels like God's called you into this environment of how do you build sustainable organizations that can really do the work of God over time, right? And I think with Global Leadership Summit, it says, how do you bring your faith, how do you bring leadership, and how do you transform? And I think being in Fort Wayne is just the extra plus, because I think God's up to something here.
Oh, yeah.
I think we see it.
Yeah.
I think we all feel it.
Yeah.
And being able to be part of that, it's amazing.
It
just
truly
incredible.
is. Rob, thank you for all your charitable efforts. Thank you for your marketplace efforts. Thank you for your ministry efforts. You're just a blessing to me. I appreciate your friendship, and I thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
My pleasure, Mitch. Thanks for the opportunity.
You know, as Rob said, John 8:12 says that Jesus is the light of the world, but when we fully surrender to Him, we begin to reflect His light. So wherever you are today, I invite you to think about, am I reflecting the light of Christ 24/7? Ask God to use you to be that reflector of His light.